How is everybody doing? And welcome back to another Strength Chat episode. Today, I've got a very special guest for you all. Today, I'm joined by the creator of Autism Fitness. Today, I'm joined by the one and only Eric Chessen. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I think I am the only. Every time I look up an Eric Chessen, there are no other Eric Chessen. So even if not by merit, just sheer chance of the namesake.
Yeah, nice. But how are you? What's kind of been happening in your world recently, Eric?
I'm doing great. I got a great night of sleep. Jiu-jitsu last night, training today. A varied day of working with my own one-to-one athletes and then leading the Autism Fitness Expert course, which is our level 2 course tonight for some people all around the world. So yeah, it's been a good week so far.
Nice. And I know I did quite a brief introduction there. But from the content that I've seen, and for everyone listening who might not know your background in terms of coaching, in terms of autism fitness,
Yeah.
just want to give a little bit of a background to yourself, Eric.
Yeah, I'll give the the brief synopsis. So I started out in the personal training segment of the industry probably around 25 years ago, and I was studying behavior science in graduate classes, and thought I knew that in some way I wanted to meld the worlds of behavior science and fitness. I just didn't know how. So initially I thought, oh, I'm going to go into sports psychology, even though I'm not really a team sports guy, necessarily, hence lifting and jujitsu. But
Yeah.
I had a classmate in one of the graduate classes who said, "Hey, I know you're a personal trainer. I work in this program for teenagers on the autism spectrum, and we've never really had any type of dedicated fitness program. Would you be interested in joining us?" So they more or less recruited me for the program, and I underwent a lot more training in applied behavior analysis and training in positive behavior support. And the programming that I was doing, there was a lot of coincidence between what I knew in terms of scalability in fitness programming. If someone can't do a push-up, okay, how do you modify it? If they can't do a full squat, how do you modify it? And some of the behavioral support strategies that I was being trained in as well. So I thought, oh, there's some ways in which these things fit together really well. No pun intended. And so then I was contacted um, by a behavior therapist who had some cases, some older kids, adolescents, who she wanted me to work with, and it just kind of started building from there. So I would say that it was at the risk of using an overused phrase, it was a very organic process because I didn't
Yeah.
have any real I didn't have any real goal of building this business around it. It was okay, I'm doing this thing and it seems to be working, and now somebody else wants me to do it and it seems to be working. But the efficacy of the program was always the fact that I had both training. So I had in both of those disciplines, in the exercise science and strength side, and then in the behavior analysis and positive behavior support and coaching side, I can speak those two languages. So I can speak to an ABA therapist about positive behavior support. I can speak to personal trainer or a fitness professional about the exercise science side of things. And more importantly, I can cross-reference as well. So when you're teaching behavior support provider about squat depth or range of motion and motor control, being able to switch back and forth and put together all of those concepts and strategies and practices in a comprehensive and usable way. That's where I started developing the PAC profile methodology, and then in 2017 launching the Autism Fitness certification. So that brings us to today, where most of my work focuses on leading the certification, all three levels that we have now, and really setting the standard of what comprehensive, well-defined, and well-coached fitness should, yes, I use a should, look like for the neurodivergent population.
Yeah. All right. Cool. And one thing, from reading, your website and the content you put out there, and one thing that you mentioned was that there wasn't a fitness plan in place when you first started, and
Yeah.
that seems to be kind of a common theme, still for
Yeah.
a
Oh,
lot of
totally.
gyms and
Yeah.
a lot of facilities.
Mhm.
Kind of two questions. Number
Sure.
one, how why do you think that is? And number two, how did you kind of approach it to try and develop and how did that kind of when you said there, it was quite organic as it went,
Yeah.
how did that kind of develop and change and grow over time?
Yeah,
If that kind of makes sense.
it's such a great question, and I think the answer can be derived from I think a couple different ways of looking at it. You can look at it from the social lens, you can look at it from a cultural lens. I think that the two major points are number one, cultural. It's like how many people in general society place an emphasis on fitness or place an emphasis on consistency in training. Not many. It's a percentage, and then those who are doing it consistently over the course of their life and doing it well is then a percentage of a percentage. And I think it's gotten a lot better. I think they're in the Western world and definitely in the Middle East and in the East, I think globally there is definitely a shift towards a greater emphasis on fitness training for general population. It's gotten better. It's definitely not where it needs to be, but it's definitely gotten better. So early on in my career, that was definitely an issue, was just a both a misunderstanding and probably a mythology around what good fitness training actually was.
Yeah.
And the second part is, I think, expectations around and the hierarchy or the importance of fitness for the neurodivergent population as well. I can tell you that when I started out now 23 years ago plus, the consensus on I don't know if I'd call it a consensus. I'd say it's more of a consideration around education and therapy and life skills for the autism population. I got numerous people who, when I would introduce what I do, they would say, "Well, why is fitness important? Like we don't get." Like they literally did not get it.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, Both I think from the misconception of, well, like why do they need to be like bodybuilding or training for sports? Because they didn't understand inherently what general strength and conditioning was, and maybe still don't. And on the other side, that hierarchy of importance of what in an educational or a vocational or a life skill setting, what need to be the things that are focused upon, the things that are prioritized for the autism population. And I will say in 2 decades, it's gotten better, but it's definitely not where it needs to be. But you can say that about many different things that we know are optimal for quality of life.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And with that, with the biggest thing is the understanding, of that. What was kind of your approach to, explaining that? Because I know, and this is something that I kind of try and work on quite a lot is that, in terms of that you said there, understanding, strength and conditioning, there's the physical benefits of that
Yeah.
why it's important. But sometimes the softer coaching skills of communication, of trying to make them have awareness of maybe what they're doing and feeling that sometimes that can be was that a challenge that you found and what was kind of your approach to work on that and actually get the clients and members that you worked with to get that buy-in, but also that value from what you were
Yeah.
trying to do.
Yeah, another great question. I appreciate that. So I think you can divide it into two categories, really. You have people who already understand and appreciate and practice as far as fitness. You have an educator, or you have a therapist, or you have a parent or a family, and everybody's physically active. They go to the gym, or they're doing something active on a regular basis. So they already understand inherently. They're like, yeah, I train, I feel stronger, I feel good, my back doesn't hurt. So that's something that I'm interested in bringing to someone in my family, in my school, in my clinic who is neurodivergent, because I totally get it. And then there's the larger category of people who don't train and they can pay general like lip service to fitness and the standard kind of non-committal, oh, who thinks fitness is important? And everybody raises their hand. And it's like, okay, great. Are you prioritizing it and implementing it? No, but we think it's good. Okay, great. Well, all right, wonderful. For that demographic, you have to, and I don't think this is all that different from with the neurotypical population or general population. You have to tie it to something. For us, when we train, we're like, I'm training because yeah, I know all of the benefits that it gives me and all the things that it affords me, either in general life or in sport or whatever. But I'm also training because I love training.
Yeah.
But for that other demographic, it's you have to tie this to something. I'm sure even maybe not, and I'm not sure, but you might have some clients who training isn't their favorite thing, picking up a barbell isn't their favorite thing, but because of the secondary reinforcer there, like I'm training in order to fill in the blank here,
Yeah.
and we have all the standard cliche, not bad, but the standard like, oh, I want to be able to play with my kids or my grandkids. I want to have less low back pain. I want to be able to get out, up and down the stairs without huffing and puffing. And all of those are great. I want to lose, 10 pounds or 5 kilos, so that I feel better about myself. All completely valid with the autism population because most of the time it's a parent or it's a therapist or it's some other representative or support provider bringing that individual in. If they're a high support or moderate support individual, that individual isn't necessarily making the decision themselves to get trained. You have to tie it to something else. And typically tying it to an activity of daily living, saying, okay, there is an opportunity to become more independent, to be more physically capable. And especially into adulthood, like when you look at the prevalence of falls or the prevalence of injury in older adults, if I can get a 25-year-old individual who is high support on the autism spectrum or needs, kind of round the day one-to-one support, if I can get them to squat correctly and get stronger, there is, and do that over the long term, the odds that they are going to succumb to a fall or a series of falls later in adulthood is minimized. So there's a safety factor to it also. So
Yeah.
the combination of, I think, safety, number one, if we're looking at it hierarchical, safety, independence, so being better equipped from a physiological standpoint to do things on their own. And the third is that, that quality of life and that transition to activities of daily living. If you can carry something heavy in the gym, much more likely to be able to carry something heavy, at home or in another
Yeah.
environment.
Yeah, nice. And with that, because I know you touched on the kind of physical side of things, which is important. I had a
Yeah.
conversation this morning about for a client who's in her 60s, and we've just started doing like really small jumps, just because some element of power is important. From kind of a mental side of things, of understanding the movement and that awareness. Is
Yeah.
that a slightly different approach as well in terms of how you would communicate? Because sometimes it might be, and I am a big believer in that. There's going to be different cues for different people, but
Mhm.
similar to kind of the physical side of things when you mentioned there about attaching it to something real world. Is that similar when you're offering coaching cues or trying to explain exercises actually in the session, if that makes sense?
Yeah, yeah, it does make sense. And it actually gets into like the number one thing that I teach or unteach. And this is like across the board, whether they're fitness professionals or therapists or educators or parents, is to remove or eliminate the overcoaching,
Yeah,
using too much language to explain something. It's funny because in our level one, our pro certification, in order to pass successfully, our attendees have to have to upload a video of them, working with a partner and going through all of the strategies and exercises. And the number one thing that we cite and say, all right, well, come back and do it again, is the overcoaching. And so when I hear, okay, all right, Stephen, first you're gonna start in the ring, and then you're gonna do an overhead press. So what you need to do is pick up the dumbbells and then hold them at your shoulders, and then it's like, no, 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 no. Label the damn exercise and
Yeah.
then show them how to do it. And then when they're doing it, you can figure out what their kinesthetic awareness, what their motor planning is around that exercise, and then we can cue. But if you're, and I forget whom the quote is derived from, so I apologize. But if you're explaining, then you're losing. And it's the same thing in coaching. If you have to start explaining something, you are getting away from effective coaching there. And it happens, again, this is something that is not just relegated to the autism and neurodivergent population. It's all populations. If you are trying to you are overcomplicating something that needs to be a visual, or something that needs to be more of a kinesthetic prompt as well.
Yeah.
So that's number one, is no overcoaching. And number two is sometimes using analogies or analogous language. So go as fast as a, or jump as high as a, or even some of the things that we take for granted, like when you say to one of your athletes or one of your clients, "Oh, do that faster," or "slow down a little bit." So those are even terms that sometimes we take for granted are going to be understood and appreciated by our athletes the first or second time that we say them, because they're comparables. If you're saying fast, you have to compare it to slower or moderate. So those gradient scales oftentimes don't have meaning for our
Yeah.
athletes until we build that meaning in. And it doesn't mean that they are less cognitively capable. It just means that there's a gap there. And we are, as coaches, as providers, we are responsible for filling that gap with some type of meaning there. And the meaning is, well, fast is this and slow is this. And what we want to get is this nice controlled movement, but the athlete needs to appreciate that. And by appreciate, I don't mean, oh, they hold it in such high esteem. They need to appreciate it from the standpoint of being able to discriminate between fast and slow. And
Yeah.
that's not always the factory setting.
Yeah, yeah. And with that as well, because I like what you mentioned there about trying to fill that gap. And
Yeah.
with some things, with athletes, clients, you start off with a certain exercise, and then there's progressions from there.
Yeah. Mhm.
How do you kind of or what's the approach, especially coaching or working someone with autism, is how do you then try and factor in those progressions? Because sometimes, from my experience, sometimes it can be like information overload, and it's kind
Sure.
of like get used to this, and then try and develop from there. How does that influence your programming, or how
Mhm.
you would kind of paint that picture of, look, we're going to start at this, and then we're going to
Yeah.
gravitate towards this, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, it's a great question again. So there always needs to be a structured approach. So I always I call it assess and address. So if you're not taking baseline for what someone is currently capable of doing, then you're not going to figure out where they are. And from there, so if I'm doing a pack assessment, the pack profiles, the methodology that I developed is kind of the operating system for Autism Fitness. So it's physical, adaptive, and cognitive. Physical is, at what level can they do this exercise? Is it at, standard, where they can do 3 sets of 10 with, full range of motion, good motor control independently? And then adaptive is, what level of motivation and focus do we have for this particular exercise? And then cognitive is both neurological, communication, reception of language, understanding of the task, and then neuromuscular. That's the kinesthetic awareness. And I know I went through that quickly, but for the sake of answering your question without going on for 45 minutes. So once I have baseline of an exercise and I say, okay, this athlete is demonstrating that They do not have full control of that range in that squat, like they're crashing down or they're just bending their knees a little bit. Um, and regardless of whether it's a physiological deficit, which it might very well be, or it's more of the kinesthetic, neuromuscular deficit or functioning, I can make an educated decision on, okay, I have to modify this exercise. So there are really three levels of any exercise. And again, you can apply this to neurotypical populations. So you have your standard, someone can do this for enough sets and reps with quality movement to the point where it's going to derive a training effect. If they can't do that yet, we modify it, either reducing range of motion or providing some other prompt or cue so that they can do it to the fullest extent that they can currently do it. And then we have progression. Okay, you can overhead press, 4 kilos in each hand. Now let's move it up to 4.5, 5 kilos. Very, very simple, straightforward, sets and reps. Progression should always be in terms of where we're living, or what we're talking about with respect to the neurodivergent population. For the most part, of course, there are
Yeah.
outliers. Progression should be the easiest thing. Like add sets, add weight, add reps. Not not much to it once you really get it. So the modifications are the most important because you can have someone do a squat pattern where you're seeing internal rotation and you're seeing folding over and over and over again. The mistake that is made is when you say, okay, well, they're squat. Like, yeah, but they're doing it poorly and they're not getting any further benefit because there's no intervention. As a
Yeah.
coach, our job is to be a good guide for our athletes. If your idea of being a forest ranger is having someone walk into a tree over and over, then there's a problem, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's how do I guide this person to getting their best current performance so that we can continue to set these little goals, meet those goals, and then progress onward. So I need to know what I'm looking at in order to start programming effectively.
Yeah, yeah, I thought that was good in terms of a breakdown of physical, and adaptive. I thought that was that was a good way of looking at it. In terms of because depending on the like when you mentioned when you very first started, in terms of like the actual facility and gym environment, because sometimes it can be busier in gyms, especially if it's the gym that I work out is a personal training studio.
Yeah.
But even then, sometimes it can be overwhelming when there's
Mhm.
a lot of things going on, because not only are you trying to concentrate on the exercises, it's then the social dynamics of the gym. Was that something that you kind of noticed, highlighted straight away, or was that something that kind of you had to work on and think, right, okay, well, how do I take that into account when it comes to coaching?
You have phenomenal questions here. So the environment plays a big role, and that's why the reality is for many neurodivergent individuals, and I have to be careful because it's such a wide spectrum, but for many, and the ones we're talking about who need a good deal or even a moderate amount of support, your typical gym is probably not a great environment. Nobody does environment better on the planet. And I'm biased here because I'm the director of programming, but Inclusive Fitness here in the States, which is right outside Boston, in Massachusetts. So we are a fitness facility for the autism and neurodivergent population. We have over 170 athletes ages
Wow.
12 through geriatric, and the environment is one of the things that we obsess over because we want to get it just right. And even for me, so quick history on the way that I've worked. When I first started out in the original program that I was consulting with, we had our own little, educational school setting. So it was very controllable, very manageable, very quiet, very low key. So that worked really well. And then I was doing a lot of in-homes. In-homes, even though the environment is familiar, sometimes the environment has some chaos. If there's a TV, if there's radio, if there's a lot of extraneous noise going on. So home environment usually much more safe than a typical gym. But Other considerations. And we relocated from New York to Charlotte, North Carolina in 2020, 2 weeks before the pandemic shut everything down. So fortuitous time to move. But one of the things in order to run my programs the way that I wanted to run them, I had to find a facility that would afford me that type of environment where it was a little lower key, where I had open space, because I will never say that, oh, anybody in any gym, go ahead and, take the certification and start running programs. There are environments that just do not make sense from a safety and from a comfort level for
Yeah,
individuals who have more sensitivities around light and sound and space. So you have to be very careful and very selective about the environment, because I am never going to say, oh, it should be all inclusive all the time. Because if I've got people who are powerlifting, or people who are throwing around 10-pound medicine balls, or doing, power cleans on a platform, and I think I have an athlete who may run onto that platform when they get dysregulated, absolutely not. That is a
yeah,
huge safety consideration. So all of these things, the programming, the coaching, the environment, the situation, all of these things have to be, I would say, radically accounted for.
yeah,
Because otherwise you are inviting potential problems.
yeah. Yeah. And with that kind of you mentioned there in terms of the environment that you've created, what are
Mhm.
kind of the some of the big rocks that you've tried to focus on, or is it something that you're always kind of refining and tweaking and changing, or have you got it to a point where it's kind of all right, cool, we're kind of settled at the minute, and then look to go again, or what's been your approach with that with the facility?
Yeah, you want open space, but not too much open space. Like, you don't want a vast field of openness, because usually having some structure around where to be and what to do in that particular place. I'm not going to give, like square footage or square meters around,
Yeah,
how much space, but there's such a thing as too much space, and there's such a thing as too little space. So you don't want it to be too confined, but you don't want it to be like a football field or a soccer pitch where it's completely open, because that can be overwhelming and distracting for a lot of individuals. And then as far as equipment, only have out what you need out. You want
yeah,
it uncluttered, and you want the space very clearly defined. So in the instances where I've been running like a one of, like a a camp program, or a 1 day event, which, by the way, I hate to do because it's always chaos. Everybody thinks it's going to be great. It's not. You want very clearly defined spatial boundaries of things. So I'll mark stuff off with cones, or with different color, multicolored rings. Like, this space here, this is what we do here. So here are sandbell slams. Over here are going to be squats. Over here are going to be farmer's walks and heavy carries. But have a clearly defined space that has very clear boundaries as well, is always the best way to go as far as a general framework.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think as well, when we were speaking a little bit earlier about kind of the information that's required, and filling that gap, if there's are spaces, a lot of gyms now, aren't clogged up with lots of machines. Gyms now do have a little bit more space, a little bit more functional kit, if you like, with more open spaces. And
Yeah.
sometimes that can be, I can appreciate that can be a little bit difficult to navigate and be like, right, well, where do I actually set up? What do I actually do from there? And with
Yeah.
that, from a trainer's point of view, in terms of understanding, I don't know whether relate is the right word, but where do you think trainers who come to you to do the course, or whether it be therapists or anything like that, where do you think they struggle in understanding, in being able to be a little bit more adaptive with the neurodivergent population?
Do you want the nice answer, or do you want the real answer?
You can try both if you want.
The nice answer is, having patience for the athlete, and really understanding where they're at right now.
Yeah.
The real answer, and that's true, the real answer is ego.
Right.
Tr- Oftentimes trainers want to show their special sauce, special seasoning. Oh, this is the way I do it. This is my, super secret, trifecta of exercises. Not going to work. Like you have to remove your ego from the process. And even though you're like, yeah, I have these, 7 different quad exercises, doesn't matter. The athlete needs what the athlete needs right now based on their capability and based on what an appropriate goal is. And in my experience with trainers, they want to, oh, we can do this and we can do that. Don't like yeah,
Yeah.
if you come back to me and you say, "Hey, I think we're going to start out with like 4 or 5 exercises total for this athlete," great. Because that means you're doing an effective and you're doing an unbiased assessment and saying, look, this is really where we need to start. So I think the removal of it's not about what you can do, it's about what you can do for this particular athlete. I don't
Yeah.
care if you have a dozen different lunge variations. It does not matter. And it doesn't matter for that athlete. One of the things that I love the most about working with this population is so I'm the founder of Autism Fitness. If I say to most of my athletes, "Hey, by the way, I'm the founder of this whole thing," like they don't care. It doesn't mean anything to them. So that means I have to be good at what I'm doing because my credentials count for nothing. My
Yeah.
performance as a coach counts for everything.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important because you want to deliver on that outcome, and you're not going to do it simply by way of introducing a bunch of the different variations of things that the athlete doesn't need right now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's a really good point. Do you think, and this might be a little bit of a tangent, but
Yeah,
talking about ego is probably a big red flag for anybody wanting to get involved in training because it's kind of been, everyone wants to have that special little trick, this new thing, whereas on the whole, what
yeah.
works, and it's they need to keep going from that. Do you think, when people have, autism and think, they have a little bit of an idea of, actually, strength training, resistance training, strength and conditioning, I'm going to give that a
Mhm.
go. Do you reckon actually the barrier to that is just trainers' egos and just the fact that there's so much information out there that they think, well, where do I start? How do I filter this through?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I have been contacted recently. This is only really over the last 2 years, maybe 3, but really in the last 2 years, by individuals who have been diagnosed. They've been living fairly. Dogs are about to bark at something. Guys, knock it off. Um, by individuals who are independent, who have been diagnosed on the autism spectrum, or, in some cases, and you really have to be careful, there are many people on social media who self-diagnose as well, which questionable as it may be. I'm not saying yes, I'm not saying no, I'm just saying I don't know.
Yeah,
But individuals who have been diagnosed and reach out to me and say, "Hey, I've had these struggles with fitness for myself, or I've had struggles with this coach." Because some of the things, and most of them are because of a few of the things that I've mentioned earlier. The gym environment is way too overwhelming. They don't know how to filter down and pick the exercises that are appropriate for them. They don't know how the exercises should feel. Also, like, where should I be feeling this? And when do I know I'm doing too much? When do I know I'm doing too little? Like that kinesthetic awareness. And the unfortunate reality is I have been contacted by more than one um, individual on the autism spectrum who has had a bad experience with a coach because the coach was trying to force their way of coaching, saying, "Well, why can't you just do this? Why can't?" And that's usually the sentiment is, "Why can't you just do this?"
yeah,
Because they can't, or they don't understand it that way, or they can't derive the necessary information for performance from the way that that coach is describing it. And some of these are like high level, athletes somewhere in like, in the CrossFit world or in the powerlifting world who have contacted me, not to coach them necessarily, but just, hey, could you explain this to me? Because the way that it's being coached to me or the way it's being explained to me is just not working. And
Yeah.
initially, those were kind of anomalies, and now it's happening more and more. Like every couple of weeks, I'll get a ping on Instagram from an individual who identifies or has been diagnosed on the autism spectrum or neurodivergent or autistic or whatever, however they're categorizing or naming it and saying, hey, here's the thing going on for me.
Yeah, yeah. And with that as well, picking up on what you said there about um the coach trying to force their way of coaching on somebody. I am a big one thing that you said earlier of, what can you do for them? I am a big believer in meeting the client, athlete, member where they're at, and having that patience and understanding to be like, what is going to work for them. What's
Mhm.
kind of your thoughts or experience or opinion, if you like, on, from those coaches who are trying to force, or those coaches or trainers that are trying to force their style on to somebody with autism,
Yeah.
neurodivergent, to try and fix that, to try and see it as a fix, as opposed to, well, actually, I can't fix this. I just need to change the plan that I'm doing. If that kind of makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it
Yeah.
definitely makes sense. I think there are two essentials there. Number one is taking a broader view of what are we trying to accomplish here? What am I running up against a wall in trying to force my agenda? And look, the reality is this is also a reciprocal relationship. There are things that in order to be an effective coach and an effective programmer, I need to do. Like we're not going to switch from strength training to to like hula hoops and jumping around simply because they don't seem to like squats. So instead, I'm going to take this vastly. No, that's it. There still needs to be structure, and we still need to understand what's going to be effective training versus ineffective training. But in order to get the athlete to that point where there is a training effect and there's a net benefit and it's generalizing to other things, I have to meet them where they're at. And in order to do that, the second thing is empathetic coaching. It's not always about how it is in your head, it's how it is in their head. So I need to get a greater understanding of what that athlete's experience of being coached and performing that exercise is going to be like. And it's easy to make suppositions or inferences that are completely out there about the autism population, particularly those who have limited verbal communication or expressive skills. And where it starts to get way too wild is, oh, maybe they're thinking about all these different things. Like you have no idea what they're thinking about while they're doing it. I can only comment on what I'm observing. So if I see an athlete who's getting dysregulated or distracted halfway through a set of cable rows, I can say, all right, something's going on. I don't necessarily know what it is, but they're getting distracted by X, or they're getting distracted at this particular time. So my thought process is number one, what does this athlete need right now? And number two, what is to the likeliest degree, what is their experience of this right now? Because it could be a couple. It's probably not 10 different things. It's probably one or two different things right
Yeah.
now. But I think supporting any athlete is around getting, their mental and emotional state
Yeah.
as much as we can get, from anybody.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's that thing of being able to, everything that you said there, of understanding that person, being empathetic with it, rather than just thinking, right, well, we're just going to do something completely different, like what you mentioned about going from squatting to doing something different, because sometimes doing the complete opposite as well isn't going to be
Yeah.
helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. What my
In
my close friend and one of my most trusted advisors, Coach Justin Kavanaugh, has said, this is one of the things that's burned into my memory. Your plan B shouldn't be that different from your plan A.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's good. Yeah, I think so many times when things aren't necessarily going to plan, you need to change everything. Whereas actually sometimes it's just, well, why don't we just change the couple of bits that that aren't necessarily working? In terms of the courses, obviously you mentioned there, part of your role now is delivering the courses, working with people.
Mhm.
How was kind of has the course been pretty similar since you set out with that, or what are kind of the main things that you have focused on, tweak, change to make sure that when people are qualified,
Yep.
they're set up to help and support this population.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I started the Autism Fitness, originally called the Level One, now called the Pro course, in 2017. And when I started it, everybody remembers pre-2020, everything was in person. So it was a 2-day course along with reading materials and videos as well. And then during the pandemic, I had to switch, and I never wanted to do an online version of it. But in order to continue delivering the work and to sustain a business, that I had to do something where there was a virtual offering, and it was one of those situations where a horrendous uncontrollable situation in the environment actually led me to do something for the better. And so now the pro course is a combined self-paced online course. So there are more than 15 hours of video and reference material and guidance. And then I do a full day practical as far as the hands-on, because I'm never going to not do a hands-on component, but people can either do that in person or they can do it virtually. In person, there are in-person opportunities around the world. I do it here in Charlotte, North Carolina. I do one for a group in Singapore with my partners Fit Asia, usually 2 or 3 times a year. And now I have my master level pros who are teaching one here in the Midwest in the US, one in Croatia. And anybody who wants to take it in person can always join me for one of the virtual practicals here in Charlotte. But I'm adamant that if you're going to be delivering fitness programming, that you should be practicing it hands-on.
Yeah,
I don't think there's a way around it. So it's changed in that now anybody can register at any time. They can go through the self-paced and then they can just join up for the full day practical as well. And it's really made it more accessible for people around the country that where I was never doing a seminar, and also around the world too. We have over 500 certified pros in, I think, 15 different countries right now as well. So it's made it more accessible without taking away from the quality and the deliverability of the program also. And it's funny, I had a couple of my expert level pros review the course when I first did the virtual version. And I'm sitting here thinking, okay, they're going to come back and say, it's not the same thing. And they came back and they said, no, it's actually better. I said,
right.
what? I said, why is it better? They said, because you have more time to digest the information because it's so content heavy and there's
Yeah,
so much to learn. Because also, Stephen, if I have a behavior therapist or a registered behavior technician coming into the course, they understand the autism side from the perspective of of positive behavior support, hopefully, but they don't understand the exercise science side. They haven't
yeah,
really been exposed to it. If I have a trainer coming into the course, this may be their first time hearing about autism or neurodivergency. So the course has to cover such a comprehensive amount of information and put it together in this usable way and workable way for people that it really is an informational balancing act. And that's why I created the expert course as a follow-up, because once people have the information and they've gotten their pro certification, now they're implementing it and now they have questions. So I wanted to create a course that would level up their expertise and say, okay, now I have all of these different strategies and I have all of these different um, aspects of my toolbox. How do I continue to have success with this? And how do I talk to other people, parents, professionals, other providers about what we're doing, why it's important, and how to do it effectively. And then the
Yeah.
master program is for my coaches who want to continue on and become absolute all-stars with their coaching capability, but want to teach the pro curriculum.
Yeah, I think that's good in terms of with the variety of fitness professionals, if you like, that do the course to be able to think, well, actually, we want to be able to cover the exercises like what we've touched on, but then also, from the communication standpoint for the trainers that might know the exercise side of things, but then be able to communicate effectively, which I think is important. Um, We've covered quite a lot of topics there and a couple of tangents.
Yeah.
But the final question that I like to ask Eric is, from everything that we've chatted about there, and for everyone listening who might be an athlete themselves, there might be a trainer or a coach. What would
Mhm.
be your take home points or words of wisdom, Eric?
So regardless of what population you're working with, you always want to have a measure of respect for the person that you're working with, and you never want to undermine that with considering what you think they can or cannot do. And it's not to say, oh, everybody can do everything. That's not the case. That's why having a measure of reality about, okay, how do I objectively observe and take into account what this athlete is currently capable of doing, and then how do I make them a willing participant? Well, not make them, but how do I invite them as a willing participant into this practice? Because it's so easy to underestimate, particularly again, our nonverbal or our limited verbal individuals, because not being able to effectively communicate, especially verbally, is not indicative of processing
Yeah,
or being able to take in information as well. And you have to have it's almost it it's almost an irony, but you have to have a complex enough understanding of all these things to filter and simplify them. I think that the best coaches on the planet are the ones who have the best filter, who can say, I can look at this thing, this exercise, this practice, this, and say, okay, it seems like it's a sound idea or a sound practice, but I don't have room for it right now, or it's
yeah,
not applicable to this particular individual. When you have that good filtration system, then you're able to apply the tools that you have in your toolbox in a way that's conducive to the success of that particular individual. So meet them where they're at, coach with empathy, and keep in mind what the appropriate outcomes are here and not starting to deviate from it. One of the things, and I know, getting on a tangent again, but one of the things that I've spoken a lot about recently is the idea of using too much variety in a program. And just because it's been 4 weeks or 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 12 weeks, it doesn't mean that you need to change things up. Like if this athlete is still at a modified variation of a squat, 8 weeks later, they're still at a modified variation of a squat. It doesn't mean automatically, oh, we've got to change the exercise because now they've habituated to it. They haven't even gotten to the point where they are benefiting the most. Like they haven't anywhere near plateau from this exercise. I've been squatting, 30 years. I haven't, I haven't plateaued as
yeah.
far as the net benefit for, occasionally I'll do a variation, but it's understanding the underlying processes, whether they are physical, whether they are behavioral, whether they are cognitive, and then putting them together in a meaningful way so that the outcomes for the athlete are just those. They are actual outcomes for the athlete.
Yeah, definitely. I thought that was a really good roundup from there because I think with exercise, it's a skill. It's a skill
Yeah.
to do. I compete in powerlifting myself. I still
Mhm.
squat, bench, and deadlift.
Yeah.
And there might be variations of that, but those fundamental movements are still going to be in there. And one thing that I really liked in terms of when you mentioned about trying to pick information is like a little bit of a tap. You can turn that up a lot to get a lot of
Yeah.
information out there and use that, or you can turn it down a little bit, or sometimes you can just switch it off completely and think, well, actually, let's just stick with this. This is going
Yeah.
well at the minute. And I think, that's why when I asked earlier about, trying to some coaches seeing it, in terms of ego as, something that they need to try and fix, as opposed to a
Mhm.
case of, well, actually, things are going actually quite well at the minute. Let's just stick with that, because then that way, and an underlying thing is, feeling more comfortable in that environment, used to the exercises when you mentioned earlier
Yeah.
about where do they set up to do certain things. It's that thing of, all right, cool, we've created consistency, we've created that comfortable
Yeah.
environment, and then it's more likely to, get buy-in and, start seeing the results, which then, leads to more effective communication, because then you've
Yeah.
you've kind of built that relationship up, which is it has kind of been quite good to come, full circle from your wrap up there.
Yeah.
For
Maintenance is good. Like maintenance is good. It means there's been a cumulative effect. And, all of us, regardless of it's, powerlifting, bodybuilding, general strength training, what we know to be true in all of these things is it's the cumulative effect of exercise that has the greatest impact. So it's not about this one session, it's about, this series of sessions and where have we gotten to, and then saying, okay, we're at this baseline now. Great. We can continue to improve it, but we know improve, especially with powerlifting, you get to a point in powerlifting where if you add, 2 kilos a year, that's a big deal.
yeah,
But
yeah,
you've gotten to
absolutely.
such a point. But look at the trajectory of that and look at the history where you need to get to that point where these little incremental changes are the ones that you're really looking for. But with many, if not most, of our neurodivergent, like life skill athletes, we've got a long way to go before we get to the point where we're making those like minute changes in resistance or reps too.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks a lot, Eric, for taking the time to jump on. Really, really enjoyed the
Yeah.
chat today. If for everyone listening who might have some questions about what we've chatted about today, if they want to reach out to you and see the content and information that you put out there, where can people find you or reach you, Eric?
Yeah, you can learn everything about the certification on autismfitness.com. And I am one of those people that loves to give you as much information as you need and want about the course. So we can always set up a chat if you want to know if the course is right for you. And I am very active on YouTube. Just look at Autism Fitness. I put out a long form video on one of these training concepts or strategies every week. Um, and then Instagram, the Autism Fitness. I post a lot on Instagram. I typically highlight a lot of my athletes and what we're doing, some of their achievements and what exercises we're incorporating. So yeah, Instagram and YouTube are my two main social media outlets.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Eric, for taking the time to jump on. Like I say, really, really enjoyed chatting with you today. Thanks a lot to everyone listening, and I will see you all next week.
Thank you.